Okay, last time we were talking about sort of the build up to the French Revolution. And we mentioned the philosophes and Enlightenment thinking, and basically their view which affects France, it affects the United States and elsewhere. The idea came that there should be, sort of you could peg governments into three big categories. Small, middle, and large. And sort of by their definition, if it was a large empire, a large government, it was by definition bad. It was a despotism. And the very small governments then could be republics. Okay. All this kind of thinking, at least my suggestion here by my subliminal messages of the images on the screen, is that this affected our government as well. Because in fact, France will get involved with funding the revolution of the United States. And why did they do that? In part because we were revolting against the English, and they don't like the English. But also others in France liked it because it became a kind of experiment in Enlightenment thinking, right? That you could start a small republic, a small country based on different principles. So this does influence the American Constitution. Okay, Voltaire. Did we talk about him? Seems like we did, but I guess we didn't. Just mentioned him earlier. Well, yeah, because I listed the three. Well, I told you I'd talk about, I've given you just three examples of philosophers, sort of big names. There are many others, but these are famous ones. One is Voltaire. And here you see a portrait of Voltaire. You can see he's a snappy dresser, is what I'd call it. He's got some nice stockings and breeches, or whatever they called them back then. You can see a nice fancy robe-like thing, or coat, very long, looks like it's velvet with gold trim. Look at his hair. This is not a guy who's going out and doing a hard day's work. He's not out plowing fields or tending to sheep or something. Look where he's seated. He's seated very comfortably in a nice chair at a desk. Now, Voltaire came from a middle-class background. He's not living a middle-class life. He got his education, as you remember I mentioned last time, that all the universities were started by the church, the Roman Catholic Church, as I mentioned here in the United States. I think you'd be hard-pressed to find any private college in the United States that did not base its roots back to a church group or organization. Okay? But you can take up that challenge if you like. Let me know. Search out all the private schools in the United States. Now, you may have to look pretty hard because some of them kind of hide their past. Some of them are not exactly happy about how they got started, and they've left that far behind them, right? So this is one of the, be quite honest with you, it is one of the fears I think that some people have with Christian universities, is that they will continue to change and change and change until they lose their heritage, so to speak. And I'm sure accusations fly about depending on what happens, right? Anyway, so he got a Jesuit education. Jesuits are known for emphasizing education. He studied the law, but he didn't really want to be a lawyer. Maybe some of you are studying something that you really don't want to be. If that's the case, of course, become a history major, because then you can do anything you want. All kinds of possibilities. Anyway, and by the way, we get a lot of people who transfer into the history major for that very reason. They figure out whatever wrong course they were on before, it's not too late. Anyway, so he wanted to be a writer. Now, you see, let's say if you've got a daughter and she says she's dating a guy that wants to be a writer, it kind of sets up what some people might say is a red flag. You know, how's a guy going to make a living? That's usually what parents tend to ask, or other relatives. But he did write things, no doubt about it. He didn't just say he was a writer, he did write. He wrote plays, he wrote letters, pamphlets, even novels, and of course the ever-popular philosophical essay. Now, remember, philosophes, as I said, philosophes have the same root word as philosophy, and philosophy means what? Anybody remember? Two Greek words. Love of wisdom, yes. Right? Sophia, it means wisdom. So the love of wisdom. But why? How is a philosopher different than just your regular old run-of-the-mill philosopher? Why don't we just call philosophers philosophers and be done with it?
Because they wanted some kind of social change.
They want social change. They want to motivate you. Right? I call them motivational philosophers. Some philosophers could care less if you agree with them. They're very happy just to sit in their office and philosophize, write essays, read books. Occasionally they're forced to go teach classes that they'd rather, just interrupts their time that they could be doing productive things like writing things and reading things. But they're not, I suppose if you really want to agree with them, they wouldn't mind, but that's not their goal. For most of them, I'd say. Philosophers, it definitely was their goal. They wanted to change your way of thinking because they felt their way of thinking was the only right way of thinking. Okay? The only right way of thinking was their way of thinking. And not only was it correct, but it would give the best results. We would have less poverty, we'd have less conflict, war, whatever, we'd have less hunger, we'd have less oppression, or whatever, you make the list, if you listen to them. Now, Voltaire, as most of these philosophers does, he will attack the RCC, and not the Royal Crown Cola, but the Roman Catholic Church. He attacks it brutally. Now, he writes a treatise, sort of a pamphlet, a document in 1763, which is called the Treatise on Toleration. Now I've got some elaborate graphics for you here that I think, if they work right, will perhaps change or revolutionize your life. Here we go. Okay, there you go. Has that done it yet? No? Okay, just let it sink in. I know it's a lot to take in.
I get it.
They're pounding the church, right? Attacking the church. That's what that means. Okay. Well, as most people who call, at least this is sort of my opinion, most people who call for toleration are pretty tolerant except of anyone who doesn't agree with them. They're not very tolerant. And so Voltaire says, everybody should be tolerant, but, he doesn't like the church because he says the church is not tolerant. So therefore, he is not tolerant of the church. So he calls for religious toleration, and then he makes a famous statement. Of course, he says it in French. We're not going to do it in French, but it's crush the infamous thing. Crush the infamous thing. Well, what is the infamous thing? Well, that's the church. That's the Roman Catholic Church. What do we mean by infamous? You know what famous is, right?
Infamous is like famous, but for bad for all the wrong reasons.
Bad, yes. You might have heard of a guy named Jeffrey Dahmer. So maybe he's famous, but he's famous for having people over for lunch, so to speak, right? I mean, he's a cannibal, a murderer, that he's famous for doing really bad things. So when Voltaire talks about the church being infamous, he's, well, not calling them necessarily cannibals, but that they're doing lots of bad stuff. And everybody knows they're doing bad stuff. That's why they're infamous. So he wants to crush it. He will begin arguing for deism. I don't know how much time we'll have to go into deism, but let me mention it here in passing. You may or may not be familiar with it, right? Deism is what? Anybody know? Yeah?
God is like a clockmaker. He made the world and wound it up, but he has no further involvement.
Yeah, that's a pretty good summary. Deism tries to take a belief in God and sort of take the God of Judeo-Christianity, but then rob him, I guess I would say, of certainly his involvement in this world, and also perhaps a lot of his attributes, other attributes we won't talk about right in here. But God is the creator. God made everything. God made a whole list of rules by which we should live, but God is uninvolved in our world today. So I would submit there are a lot of people who label themselves Christians today, even go to church every day, and they pretty much are functional deists. They don't think God does much in our daily life. We're kind of on our own. Because the deists believe God created things, and in the end God would judge. But in between, God doesn't do much. Okay? So that's deism. So he begins to argue then for a Newtonian world machine. We didn't talk in here about the scientific revolution, but the idea that Newton comes up with his laws of motions. There's all kinds of laws of how things operate, gravity and motion and so forth. Friction. Well, these ideas that there are laws by which the universe is governed scientifically, physically, they also, this idea then gets placed into that there are laws that intrinsically govern people's activities, governments, and so forth. So, his view then, this is Voltaire's view of Jesus, is that he is not divine. However, Jesus was a good fellow. He was a good person, right? His word, good fellow. So yeah, he's good, but he's not divine. He's a teacher, I guess, a good teacher, but not divine. Now, Voltaire did not become an atheist. At least there's no evidence he ever did in his lifetime. Why? I think one of the reasons is because he feared atheism. Why do you think Voltaire would fear atheism? He's already attacked the church. He's already gone pretty far. Right. Okay, if he believes God judges, then he might be worried about himself. What else might he be worried about? Yes?
If there's no morals in society, that would create anarchy or possibly.
Yes, I think that's also very much it. In other words, if he starts to teach atheism, and then the general population begins to believe in atheism, then that means that the general population doesn't have any restrictions, right? Because one of the restrictions of people's behavior, I mean, obviously there can be punishment by the government now, throw you in prison or something like that, fine you. But ultimately, why shouldn't the poor guy on the street kill the rich guy? If you believe in God, you believe in judgment, then the poor guy might say, well, I'd really like to rub that guy out, but I'm not going to do it because, I don't want to spend eternity in punishment. But if you start to teach there is no punishment, there is no God, I think he was afraid of the mob. Maybe personally afraid for himself, perhaps theologically, a bit like eternal life, but I think maybe more his fear was, what are these mobs going to do to me? Because he's walking around. You saw how he's walking around, velvet robes and flowing hair and knickers or whatever you call those things he's wearing. And he walks down the street. Everybody knows this guy's got money or got access to money, and he's not doing any work. But yet we're all working hard. Why should this guy get to do this? Let's take this guy out. Huh? I don't know. But at any rate, he never becomes an atheist. Now, let's go to our next philosopher we want to highlight. Diderot. Denis Diderot. He's the son of a skilled craftsman, again, trained by the Jesuits. He attends the University of Paris. Now, typically, when you went to the University of Paris, the focus of your study there would be theology and law. And in fact, a lot of the law was applied in the church, because there's all kinds of laws in the church. Anyway, he didn't want to do either. He did not want a career in law or the clergy. In fact, he became a freelance writer. Now, I'll just tell you something. Freelance, when I hear the word freelance, I don't know what you think of. I think of unemployed. That's what I think of. I think of little prospect to making any money. What are you? I'm a freelance photographer. That means I go around taking a lot of pictures and maybe almost nobody buys them. Nobody pays me for them, but I take some nice pictures maybe. Or I'm a freelance, I could be a freelance travel photographer. Means I travel around the world taking pictures.
Technically, freelance mean that they can be hired by anybody.
Well, yes, you could be hired by anyone. So, yeah, it's true. I think what it means is you're not working for anybody, therefore anybody can buy your stuff.
Basically means you're an independent contractor.
But let's say someday you have children, and one of your children comes home and says they're dating a freelance whatever. I think your mind's going to be, this guy's unemployed, he's not making any money, he's a freeloader, not a freelancer. Well, anyway, I'm sure it's all. So, he does study and read many things. He does write things. Let me just tell you, all these philosophers that I'm talking about here do not suffer from low self-esteem. Okay? None of them suffer from low self-esteem. That's the nicest way I can put it. I think that they're pretty great. You can decide for yourself how great you think they are, but they have already decided, and that's all that matters. So he will attack the church. I think you're going to like this little graphic too. This is not as good as the other one. But they can't all be winners. I like this one. You see what it is? Being attacked by the pencil. The pen is mightier than the sword. So when the pen comes after you, you better duck behind the paper. I don't think it's going to help, but you can. So he writes a lot of essays that attack the church. The Roman, of course, he means the Roman Catholic Church. Even though this is after the Reformation. In France, there is really only one main church. Yes?
They're attacking the Catholic Church, wouldn't they also be attacking the Eastern Orthodox Church?
Well,
the same thing.
It's not exactly the same, and the reason they're not is just, there's really no Eastern Orthodox presence in France at this time. But
the Eastern Orthodox Church is just like that in Eastern Europe. So.
yeah, I think if you talk to somebody who's an Eastern Orthodox and Roman Catholic, they would probably say we are not identical.
Well, the main thing is they excommunicated each other over something. But it was
They did.
the whole city was or something.
Several things, yeah. But you're right. He would attack any, well, as I think I told you last time, Christianity is, depending, I guess, on how you interpret it, an exclusive religion. You either are a Christian or you aren't a Christian. And for most Christians, especially those who take it seriously, I suppose, or have a kind of conservative view of it, you ought to be a Christian rather than not be a Christian, right? And therefore, if you're not a Christian, you are in trouble, ultimately, if you end your life that way. Therefore, that makes you judgmental, some people would say, exclusive, and so forth. Okay, so in our society today, that is not a very acceptable position. They want everyone to be equal, everyone to be included, all inclusive. Christianity doesn't really fit the bill. You can make up your own mind on that. But that is why it gets attacked. Now, it got attacked in his day for the same reason. In fact, here's what he said. Maybe later you could ask him what he really felt. He said, Christianity is the most absurd and the most atrocious in its dogma. Now, you know what dogma is?
That's dogma.
Rhetoric.
Well, dogma is usually teachings, beliefs.
And somehow Christianity is more atrocious than Sharia law.
Yeah.
Well, yes, I guess, in France at this time.
The caliphate did spread to Spain and almost went into France and almost took over Western Europe if they didn't stop them. And somehow that is not worse than Christianity.
It's the most atrocious in its dogma, in its teachings. Why? Because it is exclusive and because the church has a lot of power, especially in France, and it uses that power in ways that he doesn't like. He will move from being a deist to an atheist. Okay? Remember, deist and atheist. Atheist comes from two Greek words again, like theos means God. Is the negative. No God. No God. Agnostic, two Greek words, which comes from the word from gnosko, which means knowledge, and that means I don't have knowledge of God, therefore I'm not sure about God. That's what agnostic means. So if somebody's an agnostic, you ask them, do you believe in God? Well, I'm an agnostic. That means, I don't know, God may exist, God may not exist, I don't have enough knowledge, or maybe nobody has enough knowledge, they might say, to know. So that's an agnostic versus an atheist. Versus a theist. A theist would believe in God. From the Greek word theos, for God. Okay? So theist, atheist, and agnostic. There's three levels, or three different views. So he moves from a deist, some have gone from a theist to a deist, and that's perhaps parsing of it there. Deist, like we said, believes in God, but believes in a distant God. A creator, creates everything, kind of in the end, comes in, sort of cleans everything up at the end, not involved. He just said, you know what, there is no God altogether. Now, one of the things that he will do is he will write, this is his most famous work. We could call it his magnum opus. And if we now want to switch from Greek to Latin, magnum meaning large or great, and opus from the word work, his greatest work, or his greatest hits of Diderot, is an encyclopedia. As you can see it here, the title cover. As you can see, classified dictionary of arts, science, and trades. Basically everything. Diderot believed he had all the knowledge about everything. I think I could pretty much summarize. I know everything about everything. It's too bad you don't. In fact, he even said he would debate anyone on any topic at any time. That was pretty much a standing offer he made. He felt pretty confident of himself. Like I said, he did not suffer from low self-esteem. This ends up being 28 volumes.
Is this an encyclopedia, or he wrote like the ultimate?
Well, if you
Hold on, notice.
you talk to him, it's the ultimate encyclopedia. But
his history's not in there.
He covers it all. He's got it all in there. Yeah, I mean, an encyclopedia is sort of it comes out of the Enlightenment thinking, right? The idea that you could take a letter of the alphabet and then somehow categorize all information alphabetically and then put it in one place. is pretty much a rationalistic and enlightenment thinking that the human mind can actually grasp everything and then, sort of condense it down or organize it in this alphabetical way. Right? So, I haven't looked at the history of encyclopedias, but I believe they began during the Enlightenment period, because this is the idea that you can sort of categorize it in this alphabetical kind of way or whatever, in this sort of systematic kind of way. The Greeks did some of that too, but it's still the idea that the human mind is the crowning thing in all the universe. The human, and especially the human mind. Some of them would say, well, God made us, and therefore that's why we're this way. Then others will just start to say, you know what? It's just us, right? We don't need to say God did it, we did it. And therefore we decide. We decide what's right and wrong, we decide what's good and bad, we decide everything, and the human mind can do all of that. Well, anyway, again, his book, his writing is meant to change people's thinking. That shouldn't surprise us. He's a philosopher. That's what they want to do. He's got all the knowledge that you really need, and he has it all correct. So, and the discussion. So that's the only thing. It's just, if just people would agree with me, then there wouldn't be any arguments. Okay. Wouldn't that be nice? Everybody just agree with me, and I will solve all the arguments in the world. Until I start arguing with myself. Well, anyway. Enlightenment and the economy. Well, in France at the time, there were this guy named Francois Quesnay was running the economy in France, and the way that the king and the way that the Enlightenment sort of thinking is going to start to affect now the economic thinking. The thinking up to this point is that the king wanted to control all of the economy through what he called the physiocrats. The physiocrats. I was thinking there was an old Disney movie about
Aristocrats.
the aristocrats. Yeah. No, it's not that. This is the physiocrats. That's what I always think of when I say it. But that was an old Disney movie. I guess it's still around there somewhere. People still watch it. I don't know.
Love that movie as a kid.
Did you? It's about a bunch of rich cats, I guess. Yeah. Okay. I've forgotten. But it's been a while since I saw it. But I did see it. Well, the move then comes from, instead of the government dictating every part of the economy, like the physiocrats, basically what they wanted to do was to make sure they always got the best end of every deal, and that the government kept their precious metals, and that they traded things, commodities like grain or whatever, because France's economy was primarily agricultural. They didn't have a lot of things they manufactured. So, but a new idea is coming on economic film. It's called laissez-faire economics. Laissez-faire. Leave your hands off. Keep the government out of the economy. Why? Why should the government stay out of the economy? Because there are natural laws that govern the economy. And if you monkey with those things, you know how monkeys are. If you monkey around with it, it's going to mess it up. Right? It's going to mess it up. So the idea here is that the state should stay out. That's what laissez-faire is. The state should stay out of business, economic thing. How does the government get involved? Tariffs, taxes, embargoes. There's all kinds of things governments can do. All kinds of taxes and tariffs and embargoes and so. For example, and people argue about this. Quite a bit. For example, let's say talk about something big like automobiles, right? Automobiles. Many people used to say you should only buy a car made in the United States. Why? Because it would support the United States, and you live in the United States, and so you should buy a car made in the United States. Now, part of the problem became is that a lot of the cars in the United States weren't made that well. There was a period of time where they were not. A period of time where they were the best cars probably in the world, and then there was a time when they just said, you know, we just got this gravy train rolling. And they weren't that good, and then other car makers were better. They were making a better car, and they were actually making it cheaper. A lot of Japanese cars, for example. This is happening in the 60s and the 70s. And so then people started to buy Japanese cars. Now, of course, part of that was fueled by the fact that we had fought a war against the Japanese, and a lot of people didn't like people buying a Japanese car. So the Japanese actually changed the name of their cars so they wouldn't sound so Japanese. Well, that's a whole other discussion, right? Instead of a Nissan, they had a Datsun, for example. Because everybody who knew about World War II knew that Nissan and Mitsubishi and a lot of these other companies were the ones who made the airplanes that attacked Pearl Harbor, the engines, and other things like that. So, but should we let that ride? Should we just say, okay, we'll let the market go. Buy a Japanese car if it's better and cheaper. Then what will happen to the American car makers? The American car makers are going to have to up their game. They're going to have to make better cars at a better price, or they'll go out of business. And if they go out of business, well, that's all right. Someone else will come in and make cars or whatever it is. Okay? That's the idea. Leave it alone, stay out of it, and it will naturally, let's put that in quotes, naturally follow these laws of economics, and it will adjust itself. Now, the guy who really sets this forth is actually a Scottish guy from Scotland. His name's Adam Smith. So if you want to know about laissez-faire economics, you want to read sort of the Bible, in quotes, of free market enterprise, what Karl Marx will later label capitalism in a negative way, and we still call it capitalism today. This is it, The Wealth of the Nations. That's a pretty hefty book, by the way. It's a copy I've got, it's a couple inches thick and a lot of pages, and small print, Wealth of the Nations. In it, he clearly states a laissez-faire idea of economics in 1776. Year that ought to stand out to you, I suppose. Now, while today, if you said that you held to the teachings of Adam Smith today, you would be labeled extremely right-wing economically. But it came to be called economic liberalism. This is why you have to be careful with the terms like liberal and conservative.
I
Yes?
was about to say, that doesn't make any sense, because back then, right wing would be towards monarchies and all that.
Well, yeah, but...
Especially in Europe, and it's still like that in Europe.
Yeah, I suppose. But, you know, here's what you have to remember. Liberal simply means that you want to leave, sort of let something go. Like, for example, if you're liberal with your money, that means you'll spend your money easily, right? Economic liberal means, in this case, at this time, that you are wanting to be able to conduct your economic system freely.
I mean, American conservatives now are basically as classical liberals.
Yeah. Economic liberals of today would have a different meaning depending on who you talk to. So I wouldn't use economic, you know, you can use liberal conservative. You just have to remember that liberal and conservative can mean different things at different times to different people. So you have to really define it. What he means is that the government should stay out of economics. Today, an economic liberal would be someone where the government should be all over controlling the economics. What's made, how it's made, and so forth. Well, I think we're out of time. Once again, it goes too quickly. So, we will